I also want to bring in CNN political director David Chalian. He has a closer look at this new CNN poll on Trump's legal troubles. David, how do Americans view Trump's in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election, and do they trust the U.S. Supreme Court on these issues?
Wolf, in this brand new CNN poll conducted by SSRS, we see that 45% of Americans believe that Trump acted illegally in the aftermath of the 2020 election. 32% say he acted unethically but not illegally. And a quarter of Americans, 23%, say Donald Trump did nothing wrong at all. But look at this 45% who say he acted illegally. I want to look at that number by party, how it breaks out. So Democrats, 80% of them think he acted illegally. Independents, 45% think that. And 10% of Republicans only think he acted illegally. Look at what that was a year and a half ago. These opinions of Donald Trump's actions after the 2020 election are locked in. They're identical, basically, to what they were a year and a half ago. To your question about the Supreme Court, well, only 11% of Americans have a great deal of trust in the Supreme Court to make the right decisions on 2024 cases. 31% say a moderate amount. Another third say just some trust. And a quarter of Americans, 23%, say no trust at all in the Supreme Court on these 2024 election cases, Wolf.
That last number is disturbing. How important is it, David, to voters to have a verdict in the Trump federal election subversion case?
Well, we asked that question, is it essential to have a verdict in that critical case, that election subversion case? 48% of Americans say yes, it's essential to have a verdict before the 2024 election. 16% additionally say yes, it's not essential, but yes, they want a verdict. So add that together, you have a clear majority of Americans who want a verdict before the 2024 election. A quarter of Americans say doesn't matter at all, and 11% say no, they do not need the outcome of that race, of that case before the election. Wolf.
Interesting. David Chalian, our political director, thank you. I want to bring in our senior political analyst, Gloria Borger, and CNN legal analyst, Elliot Williams. And Elliot, we just heard how Americans feel going into this important Thursday historic Supreme Court hearing right now. What did the Trump team's arguments that we learned about reveal to you?
I think what they reveal is that there are a few different ways that the Trump team is saying that the Supreme Court can, in effect, keep former President Trump on the ballot. And many of them, if not most of them, don't involve touching the insurrection question at all. The Supreme Court can actually resolve the issue without weighing in on whether Donald Trump is or isn't an insurrectionist. They can answer this question of whether, for instance, the president or the presidency is, quote unquote, an officer of the United States, which seems obvious to us talking, but is a complicated legal question in the Constitution. And there's a few legal issues like that that I think the Supreme Court probably focuses on rather than insurrection.
You know, most Americans, according to this new CNN poll, Gloria, say Trump's actions around the 2020 presidential election were illegal or unethical. How damaging is that for him going into a general election?
Well, it's not terrific, but don't forget, about half of Republicans think that he did nothing wrong, that he didn't act illegally or unethically. So, you know, it shows you what a divided country we have. And as David Chalian was just saying, this issue is baked already. If you believe he did something illegally, you're going to believe that till Election Day, and if you don't, you're going to feel the same way. So in a way, I think we can say the election won't revolve around it because it's already baked and the country's already polarized about it, and there are going to be other issues that could decide the election.
You know, it's interesting, and Gloria makes an important point. You heard in this new poll that most Americans want Trump's federal election case to be resolved before the general election, to be resolved soon before the 2024 election. How likely do you think that is?
It's likely, but not certain. Now, look, I think a lot of people are expressing a very important view that this is a critical issue going into an election. But we go down a dangerous road when we start subjecting the decisions of courts to public opinion. People have opinions about how courts should rule all the time. Far more troubling in the polling that David had identified, that 77% of Americans believe that Donald Trump acted either illegally or unethically on January 6th. Now, regardless of whether the Supreme Court rules on the president's fitness for the ballot, that's troubling information for anyone voting for an individual for president. And so, to Gloria's point, people know what they know about these candidates right now, and it's really just whether the Supreme Court rules or not, it's sort of irrelevant.
You know, what's also fascinating about this poll is that just 25% of Americans say they expect Donald Trump to accept the result of the election if he loses. Just 25%. So most of the country believes no matter what happens, he's not going to accept it if he loses, and that he'll challenge it again. And that's kind of astonishing also.
It's almost like a form of helplessness that
Right.
people have accepted a certain degree of whether it's lawlessness or disrespect for the rule of law and are just willing to accept that. So again, not to minimize the importance of the Supreme Court and the work they have to do on these critical legal questions, but number one, people have the data they have, and number two, there's plenty of information about the rule of law.
And they know Donald Trump.
Right.
Oh, we lived through that once when he didn't
Right,
accept
and
the
they're-
results of the last presidential election.
And they're expecting it again if he were to lose. I mean, that's what's so striking
It's really
about
disturbing when you think about it.
Again, it's less about an individual candidate and more about the rule of law. In order for the country to have a functioning system, candidates that win need to be respected when they win, but also candidates that lose need to bend the knee to accept it.
By the way-
That is the core of a functioning
That's the
democracy.
tradition of a
It's
democracy,
tradition
yeah.
of
By the way, the
democracy.
country expects Biden to accept the results of the
Right,
election.
and I think it was 77% or
Yes.
75% believe that Biden
Yes.
will accept the results of the election if he does in fact lose.